Okay, we might make a start. So thank you all. Thanks for all joining. As David introduced, my name is Jeff Sloan, Vice Commodore of the ORCV, and it's with a lot of pleasure I'm here tonight to introduce Robin Hewitt for the Weather for Sailors Session 3 of Module 1. So I think we will go through the next slide. I think everyone now has found the chat function and how to raise your hands and so forth for any questions. It's quite an interactive session, and I'd encourage you to raise any questions you've got, and we'll probably, David and I will batch those to like themes if we get those, and make sure we answer everyone's questions throughout the evening. Just tonight's moderators, obviously myself and David, and without further ado, I'll hand across to Robin.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, tonight might be a little bit challenging for some of you, but I guarantee it'll be interesting. I'm going to talk firstly about vertical wind shear. What this means is that the friction between wind or air and the surface has quite an effect. It slows the wind more and more so as you get down towards the ground. And this graph is depicting wind speed and how it drops away as you get closer to the ground. The standard forecast height is at 10 metres. So through the coming bits, remember that the forecast and what you're experiencing standing in the boat could be two different things in what's actually felt on your face as distinct from your instruments. The instruments are presumably on your mast somewhere. If you've got a large boat with a very high mast, it'll be even more pronounced than it is here. So at the bottom of this slide on the graph, we've got 3 metres here, if you can see my pointer. 3 metres is 10 feet, and at 1 metre, a wind of 6 knots at 10 feet high, or 3 metres, would only be showing at about 2 knots. Now this is based on what we call laminar flow, and that is that it's a steady stream of wind with no vertical disruption. The minute the sun comes up and air starts to warm and rise, it mixes the layers of air from bottom to top, and that mixing level occurs somewhere between 6 knots of wind and 8 knots of wind. So we've got two situations. One we might call light weather, and that's say 8 meters, 8 knots and less, and anything above that is perhaps more regular. But a lot of the difficulties in sailing occur in light weather. If you notice the curve in the graph and how it drops away, and the scale of our graph doesn't allow the obvious curve to continue back towards 2 knots, but it's there, and it's even less in some light wind sailing. And one of the things that needs to be cleared up is the frame of reference which we're interested in. What's the wind going to do up ahead? We're not really interested in what it has done before, but in textbooks they will often refer to the wind as where it's come from. But the principal part doesn't change. When the wind hits the ground and experiences friction, it veers, V-E-E-R-S. It veers, which means it turns to the right. In the text, it might say it shifts left, but it's quick. They're the same thing, but one looks at the tail of the wind direction arrow and the other looks at the head of the wind direction area. And I'm saying that everything we're interested in as sailors is more concerned with where the wind's heading to, because we're looking ahead and trying to work out what it is we need to do. The other thing is that the wind without friction up high is much faster than what it is as it gets lower. And wind at about 100 meters or so, unaltered by friction, is usually termed as gradient wind, although gradient wind is often referred to as being unaltered breeze. So if you get a wind up aloft and you've got vertical mixing or unstable air, that is, you've got warming pockets of air that rise and colder pockets of air that are coming down towards the surface. As the air comes down towards the surface and it slows, it will turn to the right. It will veer. And if you remember the example on Coriolis, when the aircraft going to Sydney takes an hour, the Earth has turned in a larger circumference further north. The Earth has turned and the aircraft must change direction to cope with that. And the aircraft turns to the right because it has to get to where the destination is. So the thing to remember is that when a wind comes down to the surface and encounters friction, it will change direction to the right, generally 15 or 20 degrees. And that is what makes a weather system turn from circular to moving in or moving out from the system. This is going to be very important, the friction, as we move along a bit. So when a wind comes down from aloft, it reduces by a third to a half, and if there is trees or buildings or anything like that, it will experience more friction, even less, and turn more. Sorry, the question there, does it turn right or left? It turns left in the northern hemisphere. It turns right in the southern hemisphere. So stability and being able to read it is pretty important when you're sailing. Let's say the effects of the veering wind and the friction is more critical below 8 knots. Once you get above the 8 knots, the sail settings are different and friction and so on is not such an important thing. And if you remember one of my cheeky comments, anybody can sail a boat when there's wind. It takes a sailor to sail when there is no wind. And we'll be talking quite a bit about that. So determining stable or unstable, and we covered that in the last session. And reading the clouds, which we did a little bit, are the indicator that says what you're experiencing. Now here's a situation where we've got cumulus clouds moving through the air. Underneath the cloud is a vertical column of rising air, warmer air that's rising aloft, but something has to replace the air that's gone up, and therefore cooler air from aloft will make a downdraft and come down. And in effect, you get a circular motion appearing from under the cloud. It goes up, and then you've got air coming down, and it goes on the side of the ascending air, and you get a rotor effect. And one on the other side, if you've got two clouds, you get a pattern appears of rising and falling air. Where the air rises, there is a great reduction in wind. Where the air comes down, as it comes down, experiences friction and it veers. So you get different directions either side with the clouds. And so the rising air has the effect, no friction. It moves from friction on the surface to vertical movement, and so you get a lull. The difference is in the lull, you get 3 knots roughly less than what you normally would experience. And on the edge of the cloud, you get an extra 3 knots, which means that the gust on the side of the cloud feels like 6 knots difference. So if you're looking for wind, you might go to the edge of the cloud and you watch for that to get the best speed if you need it. Now looking at a single cloud, it's a similar effect. but you don't get as much vertical motion from a cloud pattern. And if you look at the air on the ground, you get these little sort of clock diagrams, and the air is spreading out in a downdraft. It comes down and moves around in different clock type pattern, whereas in the lull, the air is coming in to the underneath of the cloud and rising, a bit like the highs and lows of the weather system. And in the right hand cloud and the gust that's coming down, because the cloud is moving at a speed and the gust spreading out plus the motion of the cloud makes for a greater gust, and the vectors of how the air is moving should be longer in the direction of travel. And there is, when you have an inversion, which is a cold layer aloft, which is preventing rising air and the cloud with it, preventing it from continuing to rise, it rotates around in swirls under the inversion. And the diagram here shows how the top of the roll of the cloud, the top is moving in one direction, the bottom of the roll is in reverse. Just grab a mouthful of water. This diagram indicates that the top is moving faster and it can join with another roll and add to it. So you get a progression of gust and lulls in the one system when you've got turbulence aloft. The turbulence aloft is shown by the behavior of the clouds. Coming back to the vertical wind shear, because I want you to remember that, and just have a look again, refresh your memory. When the air comes down from the gradient wind aloft, as it comes down, it experiences more and more friction, slows down and veers. So let's have a look at your boat, and looking at the mast, at the top of the mast, the wind speed and direction is going to be different to what it is at your eye level. And this effect becomes more and more prominent as the wind gets lighter. So especially at this time, with a bit of calm weather around, this effect can be up to 50 degrees different in the direction mast top and at your eye level, or what you feel. Particularly in autumn, this is important. It can get up to 90 degrees difference. And how you set your sails to make it work all the way up the sail becomes quite critical. And if you look at this, how are you going to set your sail to get what's called twist correct? Well, if you've got ribbons on the sail, or you're carefully watching the sail, you've got to experiment to get it right. And if the wind freshens to a different speed as the day progresses, you're going to need to look at that and adjust the twist in your sails again. Now, the one way to know if you've got it wrong is that as you tack, the boat will perform better on port tack. If you seem to get faster speeds on port tack, it's a given that you've got the twist wrong, and it's time to start looking at it. And here's a diagram. We're looking vertically down from the mast head. The gradient wind is shown in the dark burgundy colour. Starboard tack is green and is your direction of travel. The blue colour is the veered wind at your eye level, and the red arrow is your direction on port tack. So what's actually happening? You've got a narrow angle. Can you see the pointer there? You've got a narrow angle at the masthead, and you've got a broad angle at the lower part of the sail. What do? You move the car aft, and then you adjust the sheet so that you close the top of the sail and you ease the sheet so that the bottom moves out further. Okay, closed top, open towards the bottom of the sail. In these same conditions, if you go on port tack, you see the angle here for the top of the mast. So you've got to move the car sheet on to get the bottom of the sail with a closed angle and the top of the sail spilling to get your maximum speed. Once again, this is for light wind conditions. The same thing does apply in stronger winds, but nowhere near to the same degree. You can have a situation in light autumn winds where you've got the headsail with the top of the headsail almost touching the forestay and the bottom of the sail on a reach. That's the kind of settings that happen. Do you have any questions on that? It's quite a concept.
So any questions either in the chat or raise your hand? But I don't think we do, Robin. If we have, we'll pick it up at the end, but I think we keep going.
I should be an instructor if everyone got that. Okay, let's move on. Now, we had someone who had trouble in the centre of the bay and couldn't find the wind out on the edge. So going to do a little bit of talk about sea breezes in winter time, like now, and in autumn particularly. We have what's called a local sea breeze. So what actually happens, I did show you in clouds at where was it, somewhere up along the New South Wales coast. The formation of the cloud and the little tufts that signal the sea breeze starting. What happens is the land heats very, very quickly when there's a bit of sun. But water can absorb an enormous amount of heat. And the water only cools very, very slowly. Somewhere between 3 degrees and 5 degrees difference in temperature between the two is the conditions for a sea breeze to commence. In summertime, it's much more pronounced. You know, you walk down the beach when the summer sun's on the go, you can burn your feet, but you only have to scratch the sand away for an inch or so, and the sand is cool. This is the kind of difference in the time it takes to heat the two mediums and the amount of heat it can absorb. Now, looking at the diagram, we have air over the warm land, and it catches the heat from the warm sand. It expands, becomes lighter, and it rises in the hot air balloon effect. So as it goes up, something has to replace it. You can't leave vacuums around. And the cooler air over the water moves to take the place of the breeze that went up ahead. Similarly, the air that's moved over the water has to get cooler air or some air down to replace it. So air comes down from aloft down towards the water, and the air that comes from aloft is cooler anyway. And where the air comes down from aloft, the warm air that's gone up over the land moves along generally 1,000 to 3,000 feet high, and it moves, and you get a circulation occurs, and the air that comes in from over the cool is your sea breeze, and it moves inland to where the cloud is appearing. Now, as the system continues, the cloud area moves further and further inland and over the water. The vertically descending air, because it's coming down, it warms as it comes down, and any water vapor in the cloud evaporates. And because it evaporates, you don't get any cloud at where the air is coming down. Now, my term for the air coming down in the system is sink, because the air is sinking. So this part of the air descending is the sink, and the part ascending is the rise over the land. Now the sink, as the system develops, particularly in summer, the sink gradually moves further out from the shore, and the rise moves further into the shore. And in the case of no wind in the centre, we'll look at a bit clearer in a moment. But in the centre, the sink hasn't reached the centre of the bay. And if the air's not rising, if the air's rising or falling, there is no wind or very little. So here's the clouds on a winter's day over the city. Now, the city has got lots of cars and things running around. It's got concrete buildings, and all these things add to heat. In New York, the effect is so great that there's a 7-degree difference between the city and the surrounding area. So if Melbourne gets like New York, we might permanently get a sea breeze through the winter and part of the summer. So you've got the rise where the clouds are, and you note at the top of the page, it's clear sky. So that's where the sink is, where the sky is clear. That's where air must be coming down. Now, the mechanism of the sea breeze is as we had before. The only thing I haven't told you yet is that the sea breeze always tends to come into the shore at right angles to the shore. But everything is dependent on temperature differences. In Melbourne here, for the in Melbourne, with the development of all the new houses in Werribee and down that way, all those concrete tile roofs are affecting the pattern of where the sea breeze is. When I started sailing, the warmest area was out towards the Dandenongs. So if we look at a schematic diagram of the bay in this circle here, we have the cloud rising over the warm land. We have the sink in the centre of the bay, and the upper circulation, the clouds rising over the land, will move towards the sink, and then they will descend. And that's the problem that the other yacht had going out into the centre. And let me say, when you're ocean sailing, you go into the shore the minute you can see some cloud, get the wind where it starts about 100 metres, 200 metres from the shore, and you don't move out on a track that you desire until it's firmly established. And when at about 3 o'clock, or on the ocean, summertime, up to about 5 o'clock, you start to head in to the shore, because as it dies, it will move back in towards the land. And here are some winter time recordings from the Bureau of Meteorology showing you just that pattern of the wind moving at right angles to the shore as it established. That's the proof I'm not talking rubbish. Now, in lakes, it's a very similar effect, but very often a lake is surrounded by mountains, and the mountains cast shadows on the early morning and the late day, and that affects the location of where the sea breeze is. Imagine a lake that's longish and not so wide. Mountains on one side mean if you start a race or something, or you're going sailing, you move over to the sunny side because the other side will be in shadow. As the day progresses and gets towards afternoon, you go back to the opposite side because that's where the sea breeze will last longest. And then funneling valleys and mountains on the side becomes very important. If you're going to sail in lakes, you need to go out and check the lay of the land. Now, on an ocean, this is out in Bass Strait, moving up towards Cape Otway, or roughly along that direction. And here's, you can see the cloud forming up here, and it creates the ocean sea breeze running along. And in summertime in Melbourne, we get the sea breeze always starts with a local sea breeze, but where there's a lot of heat, it shifts rapidly to an ocean sea breeze, starting with southwesterly, moving across around Western Port to be southerly, and then as the day starts to the sun dying away, it progressively shifts east from about 3 to 5 o'clock. It gets up to 23 knots or so in the peak of summer. And here are a few diagrams showing the wind direction. The sea breeze in Melbourne or on the bay in summer works best if there's a light northerly over the bay, and then as the land heats with all those buildings and so on, it starts heading towards Werribee, where the heat's rising. You see the clouds start to fall from the city, and heading west is the cloud forming. And then around, as the sea breeze gets going, the local sea breeze starts to shift away, and the ocean sea breeze off Bass Strait commences, and the wind still searches to be right angles to the shore. But in the case of the ocean sea breeze, you have to imagine a line, an average line along the shore, and the wind doesn't take much notice at the heads or anywhere like that. It establishes from the average coastline and heads into the bay and from the ocean across onto the shore. 5 p.m. it's pushing north. It moves quite a long way inshore before it starts to go backwards again. And the one diagram here at 8 p.m. when the land's cooling and the sun's gone down a bit, you see it shifting to the east and heading east, and your sail sets and everything all change accordingly. Then we have the phenomenon called a land breeze. It's the reverse of the sea breeze. After a very warm day, particularly in the summer, the sea has warmed and the land is now cooling quickly. It shifts east on the one hand because it's Coriolis, on the other hand because the sun has moved to the west. Oh, sorry, the sun is still fairly active in the west. Sorry, the sea remains warm. The land cools quickly. By about 9 p.m. it's starting to become significant. You can't see cloud forming over the sea, but you can feel the temperature of the wind and the smell that the air moving off the land makes. You smell smoke, you smell vegetation, but the sea breeze won't start until 1 p.m, roughly around that time. So between the sea breeze and the land breeze, there is always a calm patch or a drop in the wind. And if you feel the sea breeze disappear and it all goes very quiet, be prepared for a land breeze, particularly if you've got a clear sky. And the old saying is, if you're sailing along a shore at night and it gets to around midnight, 1 p.m, you go in towards the shore, making sure that you're watching your depth sounder and so on, and you go in until you hear the dogs bark, because the cool air carries the sound of things happening in the shore. Land breeze generally doesn't get more than 10 knots, but 4 knots even can be very significant. In a Melbourne-Hobart race, these effects are extremely significant. You can pick up more than 70 miles on a competitor if you can get it right. And the land breeze, it goes there. Look at the cloud off the shore. Another very good sign. This cloud is termed alto stratus. The next feature is what's called a katabatic, and this is another useful thing, particularly where you've got mountains or hills. The top of a mountain, example, is at such a height that the air is already much colder at that height. Country Gully, up in the hills, sassafras, it gets cold very quickly at those heights. Anyway, the air gets cold at the top of the mountain or a hill. As it gets cold, it becomes more dense, and the dense air gains more weight. And as such, the cold air sinks down to the land. And if it coming down on the side of a hill, it starts to slide down the side of the hill towards lower ground. As it slides down, of course, it's gaining pressure and it does warm a bit, but the land is still cold. And as much as it tries to warm, it cools down even further as it slides down the hill. When it gets to the bottom, it runs down a valley or a river bed or out over the sea. And we'll look at that a little bit better. This is an example at Antarctica. There is a mountain there called Mount Erebus. And that's where the 100-knot winds come from, down onto the sea. It's not wind generated in the Antarctic. It is katabatic that got very cold and slid down the mountain. In Melbourne, where do we get it? In the Yarra River Valley. It slides into the Yarra Valley and it pours down the valley like a river in the air. It pours down the river and runs out where the Yarra comes in to the bay. And it can get up. I don't know how many people are familiar with Brighton, but the wind, the katabatic running out of the Yarra River at Williamstown runs along the coast, and by the time it gets to Brighton, it can make a good 15, 20 knots. Many's the time I've gone for a sail from my mooring in Brighton, gone down in the middle of winter and said, God, it's blowing 30 knots. I'm not going to go out in this freezing wind here. But by 10 o'clock, it's just a 10-knot easy breeze. And that's the katabatic adding to the wind and running down along the shore. The Derwent River in Hobart is another good spot, and there are many, many river valleys down the west coast of Tasmania. Tweed heads up towards New South Wales. Plenty of places there, katabatics running out of the rivers. Any questions on? Is that clear?
We had a few people in the chat ask where the slides and notes were for tonight. I noticed a few of you, including David, has kindly put the links into the chat function. So if you are looking for the slides, that's where you can find the link.
Okay, we're coming up to a break soon, so you might be able to download a few then. Let me move on a bit. In Hobart, at around July, June, there is a katabatic runs down from the inland mountains and hills, because Tassie is quite mountainous in point of fact. It runs down into the Derwent Valley, and it gets very cold, and it's quite an extensive collection of cold, damp air in that area. And if you look at this next picture, the condensation from the cold, this is running, or the fog is showing the katabatic running along the Derwent Valley and out into towards Storm Bay. So have a look at this. As the day warms up, you see it starting to diminish. The air is so cold, that's why it's hugging the surface. Just study this carefully, see what you make of it. I'm going to ask you some questions of what you can see shortly. Okay, did you see stratus cloud, altostratus cloud, stratocumulus cloud, cumulus cloud, an atmospheric intrusion, laminar flow, waveform, and orographic lifting? I'm going to run it again. Look out for those features. Here's your inversion, the edge of the inversion. This is altostratus cloud. Now the stratus cloud is burning off. We've got orographic lifting occurring on the hills, especially that one. That's orographic lifting on the hills. And there, now the sun's coming up. See this rising air coming off the warmer land. You can tell it's that because of the puffiness of it. Now we start to get cumulus cloud forming. How do we know it's cumulus? It's just sitting there up in the air. Every one of those conditions has got different winds. Now we look a little bit at obstructions, and I'm using as an example Arthur's Seat in. Yes.
It seems like the recording stopped. I just wonder if somebody could fix that.
We're onto it at the moment.
I can't see anything here.
Thank you.
I think you may find that the recording stops briefly at 4 hours and then it restarts. It's a limit of the way Teams operates. I hadn't realised that the whole thing started a lot earlier than we were expecting. So there you go.
Well, I'm glad you realised that. I didn't want it to be me. One clue to people who are really interested in this stuff. On a rainy day, get yourself some obstructions like a stone, a piece of brick, something like that. And when the gutter is running water and gets a bit of volume up, put your obstruction in the water and watch what happens, because that's what we're really dealing with. It's not much different. Air and water are just different kinds of fluids. So you can learn a lot by the way you place an obstruction in the water stream. Angle it, push it down, have it higher out the water, lower in the water, and you'll get the whole picture. If you put a brick in there, for example, watch the face of the brick where the water's hitting it square on. You'll see the water rising up on the face of the brick. And that's what the air does on a hill if it can't go round or go over. Now, air is actually heavy. We've spoken a lot about that. And air will always take the least line of resistance. And it will always try to go around before it tries to go over an obstruction or some combination of the two. So you're always going to get stronger wind currents before and after you encounter an obstruction. And you're going to get Coriolis. If the wind is hitting the obstruction and it's slowing the air, even if it goes round, Coriolis will make it veer. In fact, if you have a sort of an island hill, the air, Coriolis, will send the air round on the starboard side more so, and any wind currents will be stronger on the starboard side as a result. Missed that somewhere. My notes aren't quite there at the moment. Anyway, a half-mile strip of land, take a 10 metre layer on top of it for a 30-metre width. The air weighs 60,000 tonnes sitting on top of that. How much force does it take to lift 60,000 tonnes? And if you want, maybe it's 6,000 tonnes, still a big figure. You can work it out for yourself. Look at the volume of any area, and every cubic metre weighs roughly 1 kilogram. It's actually about 850 grams, but if the air is moist, it'll be a kilogram. If you've got lighter winds without sort of stable air without heating. So we're talking back to about 8 knots of breeze and less. Then the air will pile up against a hill until it can lift above or push. It's a transfer of energy. The wind hits the land, it piles up until the weight of the pile equals the momentum of the wind pushing against the hill, and they will keep rising until it goes over the top. Much more likely in laminar flow conditions. Laminar flow means that the air is travelling in streamlines, stable layers in effect. And how it behaves depends on the surface of the land and the roughness. Trees, for example, break it up and will make it become turbulent. And that has different characteristics. If the hill goes up smoothly, comes down smoothly, the same effect is offshore or onshore. Now, the best example of this that I know is at Cape Otway, if you're sailing in that area, and the cap of cloud on the top of the mountain tells you whether it's laminar flow or whether it's turbulent flow there. And the sailing conditions are different. In the diagram here, you can see I've got rotor. In laminar flow, the streamline comes up the hill, but if it gets steep enough, the air will break away and not rise, but will make a circular motion here. And in the Apollo Bay race, if anyone's familiar with that, it's possible to have 2 yachts a half a mile apart, both on opposite tacks and sailing in the same direction, because one yacht is on the uplift side of the rotor and the other yacht is on the downstream side of the rotor because of the circular motion. So these things are all relevant to your sailing conditions. And these obstructions shown here are on the channel down to Geelong, coming from the bay down to Geelong. And it's a bit hard to see in this diagram, but there are hills, there are more shallow valleys here. Positioning your yacht in the right place can be a winner or a loser. And some people know it and know where to go. Yeah, how's that? Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
that's good, Robin.
Okay,
Well, we can hear you okay.
we don't have
I
the presentation yet.
Okay, get the presentation going in a moment when you can. There's a question from Lee about the Geelong entrance. You know, he says, "Can you explain the Geelong entrance again?" He didn't quite understand the slide with Geelong.
If you look over towards the shore, when you're travelling up the channel, one way or the other, on the southern side, you can see slight hills and slight valleys. You can go a bit closer to the shore and then you can get the wind funneling into the valleys and dodging around the hills, and you're playing with the Coriolis and those sorts of things. Now, it mightn't be a great difference in wind pressure, but it can also be enough to pass other boats who are sticking in the channel. But these things take a bit of experience. You've got to know when to go in and when to come out. Okay, somewhere after the break we start again here, and it's about divergence and convergence. In a southerly wind, in this case, blowing along the eastern shore of the bay, Elwood, Brighton and that area, up there, you see the picture on the left that says East Shore Divergence. What happens to the wind in a southerly on the shore over the land? Well, it depends on the roughness of the land, building, trees, or something like that. Can you see the pointer there?
I can
Friction.
certainly see it. I can
Okay,
certainly see it, Robin, and I'm hoping others can too.
okay. Friction slows the wind on the shore. Because the wind is slowed, Coriolis turns it, makes it veer, and it turns to the right. Because it turns to the right, we get a lack of wind along the east shore, a bit closer in. This is the gradient wind along the shore, and the wind is turning over the land because of the land friction. So there is a lack of wind along the shore here, so the wind pressure drops close to the shore here. Whereas in a northerly, in this case, we have the gradient wind running down over the water. And over land, we have the gradient wind blowing from the north, being slowed by friction, veering to the right and turning over the water. Where the turn wind meets the gradient wind, we have a 1 + 1. Okay, they're not the same strength. Probably the turned wind is about 30% less pressure. But added on to the gradient wind, you get quite an increase in wind pressure. So if you were travelling north here and the wind is too strong and you're going to have to change sail and you're going to lose time doing it, you can move a bit further offshore and the pressure will start to decrease. In light winds, you may very well wish to get over closer to the shore to get the increase in pressure. Now let's look at a little exercise here. You're proceeding in a northerly direction. You've come in off Bass Strait, gone through the heads, and you're moving up for the West Channel or on your way to Geelong, and you're going past Prince George Bank. What happens to the wind as you come in? Because this, I don't think you ever go in or out of this area without feeling the changes in the wind. Why is it so? So, what do you think happens at Prince George Beacon? That's here. What happens to the wind in this area? And we've got a poll for this. I'm going to have to explain it. It's not going to work properly, I don't think. So the wind is blowing in a southerly, coming up against the shore. Friction makes it veer, and we get convergence in this area near Prince George Bank. So the answer to that is that the wind is going to increase and diverge, or it's going to veer slightly. Let's see what happens with it. No, it's not. I think that's right. So the combination of the veered wind here with the southerly coming in gives this resultant here. So we've gone from a southerly to a south-southeast wind and strengthened somewhat. So which one's working? When you get past Prince George Bank, you go back to gradient wind and it returns to the normal southerly. Now we look at the Garum Bight up past Aspendale and so on. What's happening to the wind here? We're heading in a race down the bay, and then we've got a southerly and we have to tack. What happens as we tack along the shore here? This is another very common area for mistakes and real gains. And we've got an arrow showing the southerly here and your proposed tack along the Garum Bight. So the wind over the shore is veered and blowing more southwesterly. So as you tack on this direction here, as you come in closer to the shore, this wind actually allows you to point up more and more as you get closer to the shore, which all seems very, very nice. But as you get closer to the shore and you get more of the wind veering, you get a lessening of wind pressure closer to the shore. And it all seems lovely. Let's stay on this tack because we're lifting. And God, it looks like we might get out of the bight. What actually happens, the wind pressure drops. And as you get closer to the shore and you say, we've got a tack, we've got a tack, where do you go in the veered wind? You go straight out towards the middle. So anything you gain here, you lose double because you're now in no pressure. That's known as a zone of divergence. Okay, we've done the break. I keep going. Are you getting the hang of how we apply these principles? The look at a situation. You should be able to sail up to a shore and work out exactly what's your best course of action, or at least be getting the best compromise. This is illustrative in autumn in the bay. You might have seen this, but the principle is here's what we're really looking at. We get a light northerly and it picks up all the smog at the top of the bay. The smoggy breeze runs down the side here and being pushed into the centre with Coriolis. By the time it gets to the centre, because it's light wind, it's a brown smudge. And as the heat dies and the northerly eases off, a light sea breeze grabs it and pushes it up the west shore, and we see the smudge come back up the bay. By the time it gets up the bay, next morning, it all goes round in the next day again with a weak sea breeze and a light north when the sea breeze dies. Another useful thing, particularly if you're assisting in races at all, looking at various smoke and so on anything around the bay, you can also go to the bomb site and you can get their bay observations. If I'm assisting with a race director, we're doing this and forecasting whereabouts on the bay the wind is, where it's dying, when we shorten course, or any of those kind of factors. Maybe if you're doing a round the bay race, some of these features could be very useful. Bay winds is another URL that can give you a lot of the information, and other boats under sail or anchor, and particularly the ships, will hang down wind, but you've got to be careful that they're not lying in a current. This is a trace of a cold front coming in, and if you're over here somewhere, I hope you can see that you can be watching the bomb site and watching Faulkner or the trace here and looking at the front and how long you've got before you need to change sail, because you're looking at roughly 3 to 4 hours from the head before it gets up near Brighton, for example. This is the predict wind blur, and for those that are interested in.
An accurate forecast can be the difference between an ideal day and one that puts you and your crew at risk. That's why Predict Wind has developed the most accurate forecasts and tools for sailors all around the world. Because forecast accuracy is paramount, Predict Wind provides access to 4 different models to compare, so that you can have maximum confidence in the forecast. The proprietary PWG and PWE Predict Wind models are provided at the highest resolution for better forecast accuracy. You can also compare the best alternative forecasts, the European Weather Model ECMWF and the American GFS Weather Model. And for real-time wind information, you can check over 20,000 live observations across the globe. Predict Wind provides not only world-leading forecasts, but also 3 ultimate weather tools. The Weather Routing tool finds you the best route across the wind, waves, and current. Set your location and destination with a few clicks, and the routing tool shows you the fastest or most comfortable route based on the 4 forecasts and your boat's unique characteristics. The Departure Planning tool helps you decide which day to leave by comparing the routes if leaving on day 1, 2, 3, or 4. When your specified weather conditions are met for your preferred locations, forecast alerts bring notifications directly to your phone. Use Predict Wind on your laptop or on your smartphone and tablet by downloading the iOS and Android apps. Or if you're heading offshore, use the Predict Wind Offshore app, which has been optimized for satellite and other low-speed data connections. With world-leading forecasts and weather tools, Predict Wind is your one-stop shop for weather forecasting. Try out the incredible forecasts free today at predictwind.com.
Now, Predict Wind, I would say, is probably not the best in the bay, but some places along the coast and so on, it's reasonable. It tends to be not quite so accurate around our shores. The Bureau access model is a bit better. There is a basic version of Predict Wind, which is free. It's the offshore version. It's really not appropriate to us now. I'm just trying to show you what's available amongst so many different models. Okay, we'll move on. Now I think we've got something about windy a bit further. We'll start looking at tides and currents. First and foremost, if you remember the little boxes on the bomb side when you get to marine and ocean, they have a lot of tide information there. But tides are rise and fall in sea level, mainly caused by the moon, but also the sun contributes. And You can read the rest of it, but the coastline shape's important. Wherever you get a coastal inlet that's in a V shape, a tide running into that inlet will increase the height rapidly as it moves in to the point inland. Or this one? Go on again.
Tides, the up and down movement of the oceans, are a result of three main forces: the influence of the moon, of the sun, and the rotation of the Earth. The Earth and the moon are mutually attracted by a gravitational pull. But inevitably the point on the Earth furthest from the moon is less drawn than the point closest to it. Thus the gravitational force has an effect of stretching the Earth, causing the sphere to deform and the waters of the oceans to produce twin tidal bulges or static tides.
Yeah, sorry. Any other videos? There's no sound coming through my end. Are you actually? Can
The
you
effect
see
of the
it
sun
on
is the
your
same,
computer? Or you've got a
because at
separate
its
session
considerably
there?
greater distance from the Earth, the influence is only half as great as that of the moon.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's getting any sound.
If the Earth, moon and the sun are in alignment, the effects are
If
multiplied,
anything, it'd be best then if
and it is then that the highest tides, the spring tides, occur.
you could walk it through perhaps.
But if the Earth, sun and the moon are at right angles, their effects counter each other and produce the lower neap tides.
No, look, I understand.
All this is, however,
Yeah,
influenced by
cool.
the
I just
rotation
thought
of the
I'd
Earth,
mention it.
whose main effect is on the time
Cool.
and place the tides occur. Thus, waves form on the ocean surface of varying heights. The currents, depth, and the shape of the coastline will also determine the power of the waves, which helps to explain why tides are usually semi-diurnal, with 2 high waters and 2 low waters a day, while in some places there is just the one daily tidal cycle.
When the moon gets between the sun and the Earth, you get a combined gravitational pull from the moon in particular, because it's so much closer, and the sun and the sun only has about a quarter of the effect of the moon, but it's significant. It's so much larger. The gravitational effect is the same whether the moon is this side of the Earth or that side of the Earth, and it still has the same effect, and that's what we call a spring tide. Whereas in a neap tide, we have the moon vertical or underneath the Earth at right angles to what the pull of the sun is. And as the Earth spins, the bulge rotates around the Earth and gives us the sine curve type effect. Now we're so the variations are often shown. Different places have different characteristics, and on the bomb site, you can enter tables. There's a box there for tides. When you go into there, you can select the location. And what I want to say is that somewhere in there, if you hunt around, you can get tables up to 2 years ahead. Yes. So why is tide direction speed important? Well, the important thing above all is that tide and currents against wind put up a wicked sea. Also, you can get a free ride in a tide direction. In very light weather, I think I said it before, but the tide can pull the wind along and create a breeze. And we used to have a guy about 20 years ago who was an absolute master of this in Western Port, where the tides are very tricky. He would win the Winter Series Cup, winning the race there. And a lot of the hotshots would go berserk because he always won it. And they kept saying we shouldn't race there, but everybody had the same opportunity. It was quite interesting. What he was showing is that the tide comes from the west, comes around Flinders Point and floods across Western Port Bay towards the west, and he would position himself in windless days on the western side so that he picked up the breeze from the tide and got away and up the bay faster than anyone else did. How do we tell on a yacht what the tide direction and strength is? You want to start a race and you're hanging around the start line, you have to make sure you don't get pulled over the line, or you can't reach the line at the correct time when the gun's going to go. Well, here's one thing, a transit. If you can line up any two objects on the shore or a mark in the sea and on the shore, and you look at how they appear to move, if you're moving in this direction, you will see the two marks spread apart. If you're going that way, you will see them open up and this one start to move away to this side and vice versa. Now, to anyone who sails on Western Port and down near the heads, all this stuff is critical. Sailors from the top of the bay are not very good at it. We tried many years ago to run races at the bottom of at the heads so people could practice at judging these things. But it wasn't very popular. And we gave that away. But we live in hope. Looking down here, we've got a ship or something similar travelling along in a compass direction, and looking at the wake behind it, we see that the wake is fading off to one side. It's clear, therefore, that there is a current or a tide running. Unbelievable. Or a tide running from left here to the right over there. And you can look at buoys, moored, and see the water heaving up on one side or something like that. You can put a balloon in the water, although it's much influenced by wind. Now, in estuaries and bays, Coriolis works, but there are exceptions to it. Land effects are a big influence. If you face the direction of tidal flow, Coriolis will cause the stream to be on your left, but bends where you can read that you first. An important bit is that the tide turns first at the shallows or the edges of the bay. So if you have a favourable current and you're carrying the current in the direction you favour, and it's about to change the tide, you move over towards the edge because the current will run longer there. And you can maybe pick up a good quarter hour, 20 minutes, which could be valuable. Similarly, the tide will turn first at the shallows or the edges. Don't just take my word for it. If you're in a situation where you get a chance to observe all this, it will stick in your memory and give you sailor smarts much better than listening to me. Here's a picture of the exit of the Yarra River. And it's been raining, so we've got a current running down the river, and it's flowing out into the bay, and it's showing the direction of where the current goes. And rivers generally behave like this, where they exit into a lake or open water. This is showing some eddies either side of the main flow at the Yarra River. The actual tide runs in a somewhat circular direction. It ebbs on the eastern shore and it floats not strongly, but on the western shore. Not terribly strong on the western shore, but it is quite powerful down along St Kilda and Brighton. Just about disappeared by the time you get to Black Rock, and moves over, completing a circle to the west. In this picture of the bay, you can see the ebb coming out of the river. The tide is actually coming around here, and it comes down to about near Beckett's Point and so on, and turns to make a bit of a circle here. So there's nowhere near the amount of influence here. Similarly, when the tide floats, it runs through the heads, down the South Channel, and across along the West Channel, across the sandbars here, and starts to dissipate in this area here. And this is showing the exit from the Yarra on the Navionics tool. And where this mark is If you click on that on the Navionics display, you get tidal information comes up, which is this bit along the bottom, shows you where it is and where it's going to alter with time details and so on. So what this is saying is if you've got a Navionics app or tool, you can look for these information marks to get the tidal information. You can also get the depths of the channel and what the influence is going to be. It's interesting with the depth of the channel, when the Yarra comes out in flood tide, the stream meets the opposing flood tide here and always puts up a lousy sea. When I was stationed in the Yarra and taking people for a joyride afternoon, coming out here, you could turn them green. So the thing was to come across here straight towards St Kilda until they got used to it a bit. The other thing to remember is momentum. Momentum is the kinetic energy. Kinetic means the motion. It's the mass of the water being moved along and the energy contained in that moving mass of water. And that's what happens with the turn of the tide on the edges when it turns earlier, because the momentum of the tidal current in the main water body delays it turning. So tidal heights are not necessarily corresponding to tidal streams due to momentum in channels and depth of water. And in the heads in particular, to any of you who don't sail in that area, slack water is not at the change of tidal height at the heads. Can't stress how important this is. It's 3 hours after the change of tide as given in tide tables at Point Lonsdale at the heads. The tidal change corresponds pretty close to Williamstown at the northern end of the bay, and quite often at Bars, I believe it's very similar. When you go to the bomb site and you look at the tidal details, they have stations that you can request the tide for. There's only 3 stations in Australia, I believe, where they give tidal streams and slack water, and they all have a little teardrop shape in pink form when you select the area. It's hidden behind first quarter here, but you look for that and it gives you the slack water time or the predicted slack water time, and these are the flow rates. And if you see this one, minus 5.95, that's an ebb tide at this time. There are always one large tide and one more shallow tide in a day. And by checking these streams, you can work that out. It's also the height of the tide. If you examine the tables, you can see the biggest range and fall. In the south channel of the heads, you get roughly 2 knots flood while it's going through the actual channel, down to about 1 knot. And similarly in the channel going into Geelong, the maximum current rate is 1.5 knots at Point Henry. That's the narrow gap where the alumina refinery is, just before you enter Corio Bay. I don't have a diagram that I can show people where that actually is. When you come out of the bay and into the Geelong Channel, there's nearly always tide running there around 1.25 knots is very common. Now the rule of 12ths we'll get to. The currents dissipate very quickly where the South Channel changes to go up to the northern end of the bay. If you can remember the sandy look at around that area. And this is the tidal stream in Western Port. Follows the channel round this way. The channel disappears around here, but there are 4 rivers running into the top of Western Port Bay, and they're especially after rain, they take control of how the tide behaves in this area. It also can set up a bit of a circular motion up the top there. And again, in the Navionics chart, we have another information guide here about the tidal direction and time. It gets quite complicated here, and if you're not used to sailing in Western Port, it always pays to have some rations for emergency. The Coast Guard spends an awful lot of time looking after people who've run up on the sandbanks when the tide's gone out. Worth remembering. A different setup in Sydney, in Port Jackson. The body of water, although it has a large volume, it's very narrow with deep channels because of the naturally deep water. So the tides tend to follow the deep water in Sydney Harbour, both in or out. In South Australia, Kangaroo Island here, I hope you can see my arrow, but Kangaroo Island breaks up the tides particularly, and so there is a whole new ball game, and you're best to seek local information if you're contemplating a visit there. And the rule of 12ths. The tides, actually the rise and fall is as a sine wave. And if you divide it in 6 each side of the peak. Then the first hour, the tide will change by low water plus 1 hour. By 2 hours, it's low water plus 2, and so on and so on. And you can add these depths that you calculate to the height of tide according to the range. Now, if you're worried about this, or it's a good idea, if you Google tide rule of 12s, they've got excellent explanations there that you can work with. And this is the exit in the Derwent River in Tasmania. Won't go. Sufficient to say that when you have an entrance into a large body like this, the exiting tide current will run straight out in spite of high or low water, and then turn to the east in this case, according to Coriolis having an effect, and so it comes out there. So it's notorious if you're doing a Sydney Hobart, you go up here, you need to catch the tide correctly, which side you go once you get in the river, and so on is quite important. So we're going over time, I see, with the delays. There are a number of technology sites that have extra information. Tide Tech specialises but charges you for the info, and you get a lot from the internet, whereas you can do a lot by examining yourself. Visual aspects are quite important also. So this is what we've gone through in this course. These are some different weather maps. Why am I getting a repeat? Is that right? Yeah, okay. Sorry for going over. There's a couple of other weather maps I'd just like to point out. When you get onto the weather site and you go to the numerical weather and ocean prediction maps, just look at some of the map sites here, the interactive yes, that's an interactive map. There are no cold fronts or anything set in. You have to work that out yourself, but you can select other things. There is a front here. That's what this kink in the isobars is. You can also select a lot more information up along the top here and alter what you get. You can select all sorts of things along in the box here by pressing this down arrow, and I would encourage you to look at that and have a play, because there's a lot of information that you may not want right now, but to know it's there, and there will come a time when you want to use it. There are some of the things that you can select. And when you make a different selection here, you need to go here, refresh view, and it will draw the new map. This is the same as your wind information. You can look down here on small scale. If you want more confirmation, you, instead of selecting surface winds, you can grab it by this arrangement with vectors of direction and strength available. They offer, apart from the forecast and warnings here, they often advertise their introduction to meteorology online courses. Don't bother. They're recruiting instruments to get new staff to go around reading meters. That's not entirely fair, but they're not much advantage to a sailor. And this is windy. A bit more information on windy. I think this is the ORCV's got a paid subscription, which is $30. Just looking here how you can select different aspects to get different bits of information.
Just checking, is that windy or predict wind that you're looking at there?
This one is
Down the bottom
predict
right,
wind.
it says predict wind.
Sorry, this afternoon it looked like predict wind. Anyway, that was windy before there, and then predict wind. You can get that. You can bring up this kind of thing for extreme winds or upper atmosphere winds if you select that. And there are lots of layer selections in windy, and here where it says more layer selections, you get layers that will fill the entire side where you can select what kind of information you want. And I thought you can get the table. There's that along there. Time scale out to 10 days along the bottom, but you will not get fronts drawn in. You have to look at the wind and imagine where they are. I won't say that's very difficult, though. No one else. Okay, I'm over time. I just want to show you this one slide and then I'll give it away. It's for light weather sailing in the winter time. It's called getting out of jail. Can you see that? No. There we are. Got it back. Here's what you have to do to get out of jail. That's where you've got no wind or next to no wind. You set the boom with 2 preventers, one either side, and you fix it in position at about 45 degrees off the centre line of the boat, and you let the jib flap to make sure which side is favoured. If you're just rocking there and the sail appears to be flogging, which side does it stay the longest on? Because that will be the favoured side. And you swing the boat over to that side at 45 degrees and anchor it using the 2 preventers. Then you let the sheet on the jib go and let it flog right out, and then gradually wind it on. Not tightly, but just wind it gradually on to get a little bit curvature at the clew first, and see if you can get the boat to start to move. Even if you're putting a little bit of paper in the water and seeing if the boat passes the piece of paper. Never mind how long it takes to pass. If you can get moving at all, you are starting to create apparent wind. As you get to increase the apparent wind, you can pull the headsail on a little bit by little bit and see if the boat picks up speed. When you get enough speed to get up to 1 or 1.5 knots of boat speed, you can start to bring the boom in a little and try to increase your apparent wind. Again, have a good play with that. It's a great experiment. Okay, that's as far as we can go tonight. I'm sorry we've had these misadventures. I'm sorry my voice isn't very solid. Something I've got to live with. But where we are, there's enough information there to refer to your notes as time goes by. That came on no. Okay, as time goes by, refer to the notes from time to time, or whenever you experience something different, go back to the notes and have a look, and you'll get an idea. Any questions?
I was going to say everything's in the notes. I was going to say if you've got any questions between now and say the next 24 hours, feel free to contact your ORCV and we can make sure they get across to Robin to answer. Otherwise, if there is no questions, I'm happy to wrap up the night.
Can I perhaps ask a quick one? David Taylor here. We had a couple of problems with a couple of the videos. Maybe if Robin could explain the difference between the different weather models, like the access model from the BOM, the GFS model from the US, and the ECWMF model, and what he prefers and why. Because I think that was a key part of the difference between windy and the others.
Every wind model is designed and concentrates on a particular aspect. The GFS American model, for example, is super red hot around Guam or any American possession or interest. It works worldwide, but not to the same degree. And it's never had as much work put into it except in American interest, but it is also free, and model makers can get hold of the model for free. And that's why so many of things like bay winds, buoy weather, and that they use GFS. The Bureau concentrates on Australia. That's its brief. That's what the Australian government pays for. And they pay particular attention to all of Australia. The ECMF is pretty good around Australia. It's not bad. It's the European funded and model for Europe in particular, but it's got more accuracy, I suspect, in non-American areas than the access model. Probably not very good in Europe and the way there, but there are some special models. METEO, METEO, that's England and France in particular. There is a special model for covering Switzerland, because Switzerland has so many hills and mountain valleys that it has a special routine it runs over to get detail in that area. Japan has their own model. Doesn't come to me at the moment, the name of it, but access for New Zealand and Australia will give you pretty good results. Once you get out to sea, the differences are not so great because the effects don't need as much detail. Yeah, so you can switch to other models with reasonable success if you're out to sea or ocean sailing. But around the Australian coast, look at all the other models if you wish, but do check the Australian bomb site.
Thank you, Robin.
Fantastic. Thank you, Robin. If we've got no other questions, we might wrap up there. But thank you very much for your time, everyone, and thanks again, Robin, for your expertise on this subject. Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, David.
Thanks very much, Rob.
Thank you all for being there. I see lots of hand clapping and thumbs ups and things like that from different people, so that's lovely as well.
We can't see it.
Oh, it's there. Look, there's somebody there now. Neil was clapping.
Not for us.
Oh no, it's on their little logos, or it's on the image as well. They sort of float up from the bottom, so that we can see them and know that somebody appreciates. So it's always nice. See, there's one now too.
Sorry?
Did you see those ones?
We've got technical issues at this end, David.
Oh, well, you're missing out. Anyway, okay then. Well, I think that's probably it for this evening, everybody.
Okay.
I'll stop the recording in a moment, and we'll be around for a short while probably, but pardon me. We'll be sorting out a couple of our own issues, but so if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat or anything, and then we can also make sure that we get back to you on any of those things as well. Okay, or send them as requested to the training email address is probably the easiest way from here. Okay, well, thank you, Robin, and thank you, Jeff, as well, for helping at Robin's end there.
Thank you, David.
It's always a pleasure, Robin.
All right, I might end the call on my side, but I think we're all good.
Okay, then.
Okay.
I will.
Thanks all.
Okay.
Stop the recording. Yeah.
I'm about to stop it, yes. And I will put together, I'll put the recording together and